Battlefield, Series 1, Episode 3, The Battle of Midway, 4 June 1942. Somewhere in the vast, featureless expanse of the central Pacific Ocean, 322 miles northwest of a tiny coral atoll most people have never heard of, the most powerful naval force ever assembled is sailing in silence. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's Kido Butai, the first mobile strike force of the Imperial Japanese Navy, cuts through the pre-dawn swells with quiet, terrible confidence. 4 fleet carriers, 2 battleships, dozens of cruisers and destroyers, over 200 aircraft armed and ready. This is the force that humiliated Pearl Harbor. This is the force that, in the 6 months since that December morning, has swept across the Pacific like a tide no one could stop. And now, on the morning of 4 June, it is coming for Midway. On the island itself, 3,000 American servicemen are waiting. They know something is coming. They simply do not know if knowing will be enough. What happens in the next 18 hours will not be decided by firepower alone, nor by the sheer weight of steel and aircraft that Japan has committed to this operation. It will be decided by something far less visible: intelligence. Specifically, the cracking of a Japanese naval code designated JN-25, and the extraordinary gamble made by one American admiral who chose to trust what his codebreakers were telling him over what common military wisdom suggested was possible. The Battle of Midway is, at its core, not a story about aircraft or torpedoes or bombs. It is a story about information: who had it, who acted on it, and what it cost those who did not. By the spring of 1942, Japan held the strategic initiative across the Pacific. The attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941 had crippled the American battleship fleet, and the weeks that followed had seen the fall of the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. Japan's defensive perimeter now stretched from the Aleutian Islands in the north to the borders of India in the west. It was an empire built in months, and its architects believed it was unassailable. The architect of Midway was Yamamoto himself, arguably the most sophisticated strategic mind in the Imperial Japanese Navy, and a man who understood, perhaps better than any of his colleagues, that Japan's window of dominance was narrow. America's industrial capacity dwarfed Japan's. Given time, the United States would rebuild, rearm, and return in overwhelming force. Japan's only chance was to destroy American naval power in the Pacific before that recovery could occur.
Launch all remaining planes!
Midway was
for the glory
bait.
of the Empire!
Seize the atoll, threaten Hawaii, and the American Pacific Fleet, whatever remained of it after Pearl Harbor, would have no choice but to come out and fight. In open battle, Yamamoto believed his carriers would annihilate what was left. It was a logical plan. It was also already compromised. In a basement in Pearl Harbor, in a section of the Naval Intelligence Building known informally as Station Hypo, a small team of codebreakers and analysts had been working for months to penetrate JN-25. The man in charge was Commander Joseph Rochefort, an eccentric, brilliant, frequently sleep-deprived officer who wore a red smoking jacket and carpet slippers to work and rarely left the building for days at a time. Rochefort and his team could not read every message. JN-25 was a complex, layered code that resisted complete decryption. But by May 1942, they had enough. The Japanese were planning a major operation against a target they designated AF. Rochefort was confident that AF was Midway. Washington was less certain. To settle the question, the Americans used a simple but elegant trap. They sent an unencrypted radio message stating that Midway's water desalination equipment had broken down. Within days, a Japanese intercept reported that AF was experiencing a fresh water shortage. The identification was confirmed. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Armed with this intelligence, Admiral Chester Nimitz made the decision that would define the battle. Rather than dispersing his forces or retreating to defensible positions, he would concentrate his 3 available carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, northeast of Midway, beyond the range of Japanese scouting aircraft, and wait. Japan expected to ambush the Americans. The Americans intended to ambush Japan. The morning of 4 June unfolded initially according to Japanese planning. A first wave of Japanese aircraft struck Midway at dawn, damaging installations but failing to suppress the island's defenses sufficiently for a landing. American aircraft, torpedo bombers from Midway and then from the carriers, attacked the Japanese fleet in uncoordinated, costly waves. The results were catastrophic for the Americans. Torpedo Squadron 8, flying obsolete TBD Devastators without fighter escort, was almost completely destroyed. Of the 15 aircraft in the squadron, not one landed a single hit. Only one pilot survived. His name was Ensign George Gay, and he watched the rest of the battle from the water, clinging to a seat cushion. But those doomed torpedo attacks had an effect no one had planned. They pulled the Japanese fighter cover to sea level at precisely the wrong moment. High above, undetected, 3 squadrons of American SBD Dauntless dive bombers were beginning their attack runs. In the space of roughly 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were turned into burning ruins. A 4th, Hiryu, survived long enough to land damaging blows on Yorktown before she too was found and destroyed. By the evening of 4 June, Japan had lost 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers, a heavy cruiser, and over 300 aircraft. More critically, it had lost the experienced air crew, the pilots, navigators, and observers who had been at the heart of Japanese naval aviation since before the war began. These were men who could not be quickly replaced. America lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, and 147 aircraft. A terrible price, but not a fatal one. Midway changed everything, and it did so not because of heroism alone, though there was heroism in abundance, but because of a decision made weeks earlier in a basement in Pearl Harbor in a man in carpet slippers who trusted his analysis over his doubts. Japan never again held the strategic initiative in the Pacific. From Midway onwards, the war moved in one direction only. The empire that seemed unstoppable in December 1941 had been turned by 18 hours of battle and by the quiet, unglamorous work of men who never fired a shot. The ocean keeps no monuments, but the mathematics of what happened here are as precise and as permanent as anything carved in stone.